So here's the thing, right? I actually made this tutorial like 3 months ago, and then I never got around to posting it because I went through a particle phase or something like that. And while making a bunch of other videos, I thought, well, I need to post something, so I'll post this one. And I thought I'd redo the intro. So, because I've been filming myself a lot recently, so I thought, you know, you can look at my face for the intro instead of me going over a Figma board or something boring like that. I made this tutorial like 3 months ago. I was never actually going to do like a ballooning tutorial or pillows. That's what we're making here, is pillows, but we're using the ballooning mechanics. And the reason for that is because there was just so many of them. GSG had done them, 3D Bonfire had done them, and I was like, nah, what am I going to add to it? But then I was playing with them a couple months ago, and I was finding all these cool things that nobody has actually went over in their videos, and also the render itself, I feel like it's in its own lane. I'm not making balloons, I'm making pillows, fabricy. And that's what I really wanted out of these renders, was it not to feel like a balloon, but to feel like a pillow where there's airier parts and kind of, you know, almost like a bean bag, where if the beans kind of fall to the bottom of the bag, the top of it's like lighter and fluffier, and the textures kind of lend itself to that as well. So I thought it would be worth making a video on it because some of the techniques in it I just know are a little bit advanced, but also interesting and just cool things to learn. And I thought, screw it, I'll join the club and throw a ballooning / pillow tutorial out there. So I hope you like it. There is going to be a second part to this on the Patreon because there's a lot of other kind of pillow designs I want to go over. So definitely check that out. But as usual, you know the drill. First 5 people that hit that link in the description will get on my Patreon for free for a month. If you missed that, I'm going to make a code called Pillow, and for like the first 24 hours after this video goes up, if you use the code PILLOW, you get 50% off. And also don't forget to join the Discord. The Discord's awesome, lots of exclusive stuff over there. We're always chatting in the different chats, figuring out things with simulations, and it's much easier to actually understand what's on the Patreon and the Discord as well, so you can join that below. And if you want to be coached by me one-on-one, you and me, there's more info on that below as well. I won't ramble on anymore. I've promoted everything I want to promote. I'll let you go make some cool pillows. Catch you later. I'm like having to bend down to fit in this lens. I'm like standing diagonally the whole time. It's like, ugh. So we're starting out here with paths straight out of Photoshop. All the paths I used will also be on my Patreon. So if you just want the logos, you don't have to trace them yourselves and stuff. They'll be up there. You can go grab them. First thing I'm going to do is I am going to connect these. And we're going to pull them out the null because for some reason they're not at the center of the world. We're going to just put that right at the center there. And the next thing I'm going to do, because we're simulating, I'm going to drop in a cube and we're going to scale that logo up. We don't want the logo too small, maybe about the size of a cube, right? So we're kind of at like default world scale now, and we're in a good place to move forward. Next up, we're going to extrude. Now, when I'm making videos, I don't just like to show you the A to B. This is the ladder to climb. I really like to generate a bit more understanding under what we're doing and why you make certain decisions. Now, I have hindsight and I have already done these and played with them, so of course I can warn you about specific things, but thickness is actually quite important here. The thinner we make this, the more it's gonna misbehave, so don't be afraid to make this a pretty decent thickness. This is really gonna kind of suck itself up a lot, so we want this to be a pretty decent thickness. And of course you can change this later on, but it's kind of a nice point now just to set the thickness that you want. So after the extrude, we're just going to make that editable. And if we do NB here, you can see that we have no polygons. And that's not great because we need to simulate basically cloth on this. And that needs polygons. So we're going to do volume builder. And this is a really easy way to just jam a bunch of polygons into an object. And we set the voxel size down to 1. And then we do Shift C to get this search bar up. Volume measure. We put volume measure in there. We have a look at this. We now have a bunch of polygons, but not very nice looking geometry. It's all jaggedy and stuff. So we're just going to drop in an SDF smooth, and we can maybe bring that to about. We want a decent bevel in there, but you can also just bring down the voxel size more. So we could do like 0.8, and then bring up the strength of the SDF smooth a bit. You could just crank that maybe like 50%. A decent bevel here is relatively important, and the voxel size as well. Sometimes when you use volume builder and stuff, you can get like kind of banding across the object. I don't think that really matters too much in this scenario because we're going to be sticking big displacement on it and stuff anyway. So now you've got that, what I would do is actually just control drag that down and create another one and hide it and just call it like misc or something. And then it's there if you need to come back to it, you can just go in and make a new one, because what I'm going to show you soon is there may be scenarios where you quickly just have to do this part again if the mesh decides to misbehave. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to make this editable. So we've got this editable. Now we're going to do Shift-C and we're going to remesh this. And at first you can just remesh this at 100%. It's only going to take a few seconds. And this is just going to make the geometry actually like quads and look nice, because when it comes with the volume builder, it doesn't look very good. So we do NB on that now, and we have a pretty decent solid mesh. The first time I was doing this, I was getting some weird, you see you kind of get these tight bits. Sometimes you might just get that like in strange areas, kind of on the front or the back. This time it seemed to come out quite well. If you do get that, a way of getting around it is like I would crank the mesh density down by like 1%. Sometimes just getting it to run through the operation again can get it to get rid of little bugs and stuff. I am going to drop this a little bit. So let's come to 75%. So we don't need a super dense mesh. It's just going to make the simulation run really slow, because we're ballooning stuff. You're not going to be able to extrapolate tons of quality out of a high density mesh anyway. We could come a little bit lower. Let's do 50. Right, this is probably going to be where we want to stand. So we can make that editable, and you can call it Adidas_logo. And now we are basically ready to start simming. So before we do any of that, I'm going to save the scene. Now something I want to explain. If we right click and do simulation tags, you see these 3 tags here: balloon, soft body, cloth. And I want to explain this for people that are new to simulations. These are all the same tag. They are not different. They're all cloth. They're all the same thing. They're all using the same engine. The only difference is, for example, if I drop in a cloth tag, as soon as we enable it, it becomes a balloon tag. If we turn that off and we go to soft body, we enable that, it becomes a soft body tag. All those tags are the same thing. So just in case that is something you're confused about, this is something I've seen with people that I do coaching and whatnot. It's all the same tag, same thing. The second you enable that checkbox, it's a balloon tag. So we enable that now, and we have overpressure and expansion time. The only thing we're really going to pay attention to here is the overpressure. Now if we do Control D and we go to Scene, Gravity, we're going to zero off that gravity. And I'm also just going to set the amount of frames in the scene to something a bit higher. And if we were to play through this now, not a lot is probably going to happen. Just give it a second to calculate, and then it gets going. You're really seeing nothing. But what if we put the overpressure to 5? Do we see anything happening? Yes, you do. You see it ballooning up and going absolutely crazy. Now we actually want to keep these overpressure values relatively low. The thing we're going to be manipulating to get a lot of the movement and kind of ping the animation into motion is this target length. So if we have a look at what happens if we shrink that down, target length below 100% is going to shrink, above 100% is going to expand. So if we bring this down, you're going to see it sort of ping down in scale, and even on the overpressure of 1, you're getting some sort of cool ballooning effects, but we're losing all the shape. And if we reference back to the Figma board, you can see here that I really wanted to keep a lot of the structure there. You can tell it's the Adidas logo. You can tell it's the Google color, mostly because of the color. You can tell it's the Windows. You can tell it's the Nike. The Nike one was very difficult to retain that shape, which is why it's going to need an entire other video. But we want to keep that shape in there. So let's have a look at what happens if we expand. You can see that retains more of the shape. So for this Adidas logo, and this one specifically, we need to be expanding, not shrinking. But this is kind of a little bit woo-woo, bit all over the place. So how are we going to art direct this to get a controlled motion that we like? We're going to right click, other tags, we're going to add a vertex map. And in this vertex map, I'm just going to reselect the tag again. We're going to hit use transfer. We're going to take off the freeze, and we're going to add in a box field. And you can just bring the size on the Z down to about 5. But you notice here, the object isn't actually at the center of the world, and this is going to make our life a little bit easier if it is. So the axis, as you can see, is at the back of the object. So we're going to do Shift-C, axis center, and we're going to grab this, just select all of these. It's usually for safekeeping, you don't have to, but sometimes you have to select them, sometimes you don't. I'm just want to come back to the beginning here and zero all this out. With this box field, it doesn't have to be a child of the Adidas logo. What we're going to do is come in here into the vertex tag, and you can see here now that we've got this yellow stripe, right? So we're going to expand this way up here, we're going to expand this way up there, so we have this solid yellow stripe all the way around the object. And we can maybe just expand this a little bit, And if we now come back to this target length and we drag that in there, everything that's yellow is now going to be affected by that target length parameter. Everything that's red isn't. You're not really going to be able to notice it too much. This isn't the effect that we want, but it's a step closer. So you can see now, although everything still seems to get affected, you can see that the places that were yellow were kind of affected more. And you can see already you've got something that is starting to get a little bit of movement. That's closer to what we want. But what I actually want is I want this inverted. So we want everything on the red to be tight and everything on the yellow to be affected. We have a look at this now, and we're kind of retaining some of those sharp edges, and that's looking quite cool. But if we have a look at the vertex tag here, it's looking okay in terms of what's being shown on the object, but sometimes depending on the object you're using, you might be following this tutorial with whatever object you want, especially if you're a slightly more advanced user of Cinema. What we want to do is just add in a freeze. Come back to the beginning and hit freeze. Sometimes you can see this really glitching out. So the freeze is going to stop that and it's going to retain that pattern all the way through. And it's not going to try to move around the object. I didn't really see many issues with it with the Adidas logo, but with the other logos, I definitely did. Okay, so next up, we're kind of going to tinker a little bit. Let's increase the target length more. I've bumped that to 140. We've got that expanding out. And this looks cool, right? But it's still nowhere near what I want. Let's come back to this overpressure value. What if I set this overpressure to 3 now? And we may have to compensate by bringing down the target length a little bit. But of course, that's going to add more pressure to the inside of this balloon. Well, it's still looking like a balloon right now, right? Very much so. But we want this to feel more like a pillow. And with pillows, we need a nice variation between a decent amount of air and a decent amount of stuffing. So let's have a look at a value similar, maybe about 2. Okay, now you can sort of see we're kind of getting a bit more pressure filled out. It's a little bit nicer, but it's still not very close to what we want. Let's bring back down the target length. So if we bring this back to 1 here on the overpressure, you can see that whether we bring that overpressure up or we bring it back down, default value, this is kind of the closest to what we want, right? Okay, we've got patterns, we've got intricacies, it looks good. There's a couple of things we need to do to get this in more the direction that we want. The first thing we can do is if we come back to this first frame, I'm going to clear this and I'm going to freeze it. Well, I would often just delete it and then add a new one in case it gets a little bit mangled. I am going to increase this a little bit, and we can actually just increase that inner offset so it's a little bit sharper. I'm just going to have it cover more of the sides. I'm going to add the freeze back in. We're going to hit freeze. Let's have a look at this now. Okay, cool. So you can sort of see a bit more rigidity on the sides there now, well, a bit more restriction. Now there's a couple of things now that get a little bit complicated that's going to give us the look that we want. The first thing is here on the overpressure. A value of 1 isn't going to be totally what we want, but a value of 4 or 5 wouldn't be what we want either. So I'm going to introduce you to something called a field driver. So if we add this, we right click, field driver, add, we add this. And you see it's going to drop this tag on our object. Now it's promoted that parameter up here and we have the overpressure. You could add more parameters if you wanted as well. And we have a minimum and a maximum. So what we want to do is create the maximum amount of overpressure we want and the minimum. So if we did 3 and 1, for example, to begin with, and then we went to the fields and we added in a shader field and we put a noise in there. We go into the noise and let's say we add a little bit of contrast and we set the animation speed to about 10. Animation speed is important here. And we bring up the scale a little bit. Now if I come back to the balloon tag, and you can see that's already yanked itself up to 1.9. So if we come back to the beginning here, we play through. Now based on that noise animating, you're going to see it shimmying between a value of 1 and a value of 3, which is going to allow us to flicker between nice amounts of overpressure, lower amounts. That's going to kind of give us that level of intricacy that we want. And you have to tinker with this and really find the values that work. You can see it's already puffed out a little bit too much. But as we get more and more into the animation, you can see something kind of coming together here. But this is way too much pressure for what I want. The next thing we are going to do, though, is we're going to add a turbulence. And this is also going to affect the amount of intricacy that we see on the object. So we're going to add a turbulence. But you're probably thinking, right, you're dropping in a turbulence. But when you drop in this turbulence, and we do a strength of 40 and a scale of 50. Well, let's actually do a strength of like 25. You're probably thinking that turbulence is going to make the objects fly away, so why are you doing that? Because we need to keep that shape. Well, here's the next thing we're going to do, is we're going to go to the balloon tag. We're going to go to mix animation. We're going to go to with force. We're going to drag that vertex map in there. Now that vertex map is going to hold this in place because what's red is not being affected. So what we're going to do is have the turbulence affecting, of course, the front and the back, whatever's yellow, which is going to give us some nice movement across the object without making it fly away. And you can see already that is immediately giving us a cooler look, but the overpressure is by far maybe a little bit too much. The other thing we can come back to, of course, is that target length. This is something I would come back to and have a play with, see what works best for your object. Because if we have less expansion at the beginning, that could also help things. But the main issue here is we have too much overpressure, right? So if we come back to that field driver, let's say between 2 and 0.7. So if we were to go 2 is the absolute max, 0.7 is the minimum. You can see that's a little bit closer. Turbulence is definitely too strong, so let's bring that down. We can bring down the scale a little bit as well. Now you've kind of got some more relaxed movement. And this is closer to my original render. And you can see here we've kind of got this pillow effect now where you've got this kind of nice rigidness. You could sort of tell which pieces of the fabric would be more pinchable versus what parts would be more grabbable. And you can sort of feel that differentiation in there. Of course, the only issue is though is the side is gone too rigid. So we're going to come back to the vertex tag and we're going to delete the freeze. And I'm going to add some of that inner offset in there again. And I'm going to make it a little bit thinner. Let's come back to remapping. We'll add a bit more of that, just so it's a little bit more vague. And then let's pop the freeze back in, freeze it again, so it doesn't move. And we play through that now. And yeah, you can see that's just a little bit more relaxed. It's a little bit nicer, less of that contrast on the edges. But it's still retaining all of its shape. You've got this nice animated movement between everything. And that's pretty much the setup. Now, what I mentioned about it varying between the logos is all of these values can shift quite a lot. Is the amount of overpressure we need, whether we're using sub-target length or above 100%. These things change a lot, as well as also the kind of shader field that we use, whether we want it grabbed on the edges or whether we want it with a box field. And this is very much a result that I'm happy with. Now, when it comes to getting different results with these, and I'll go over this on my tutorial over on Patreon as well, as it really comes to juggling the target length. Is do you need below 100%? Do you need above? What overpressure values do you need? And also how we're setting up that vertex tag and how we're locking different pieces of the object in place. And how we do that is going to instruct how the overpressure drives the ballooning a lot. So hopefully that's equipped you with the tools to play with this and tinker with it and get different results. But for me, this is a really, really nice result where it's super clothy and you can feel the pressure in there, but you're still getting folds and it really feels like a pillow and it feels nice. It's maybe, it's maybe a little bit rigid on the sides, but we're not really going to see that. The only way around that would be to dial that in even more. But I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking. You can see we've got this nice movement in there. So I'm going to cache, and I'm going to cache 210 frames. And we're just going to cache this. All we have to do is go to the cache and cache object. And it's going to cache super fast because it's not a heavy simulation at all. It's actually going a little bit slower than some of mine were. But once we cache this is going to make rendering a lot easier because we're going to need a lot of subdivisions on the object to get the material to look the way we want it to look. So that's all cached now, and you can see that's playing through super fast. That's nice. And we could grab whatever frame we like here to get the look that we want. I kind of like this bit with that kind of main crease up there. Now on my original Adidas render, I had more overpressure, and that's where this is weird because I'm basically doing everything the exact same way. I guess the slight scale of the logo being off and whatnot can affect it. I actually had if we come to the field driver, I had between 3 and 5 to get my original look. Whereas to get something similar here, I had to do between 0.7 and 2, which is certainly interesting. But to me, this is a similar enough look. I was very tempted to tinker with it a little bit more, but I like this look. I like where we're at. We've got a nice amount of folds. It looks good. So we're going to dive into Redshift. We can tidy this up a little bit. Shader field, that's controlling the field driver, so you can call that field driver noise. Box field, you can call that vertex box, for example. And that's pretty good. Turbulence, don't need that anymore. In fact, we don't need any of them on anymore. Yo, what's up? Sorry to interrupt your render making like that. Like I know you were probably like in the middle of making some cool pillows and shit, and then like bow, my face. This is actually just a short interjection for me to make you aware that I do one-to-one training. You and me, one-on-one, on calls, me teaching you renders, my entire workflow. And basically, like, dude, like everybody I coach, they're like, you need to promote this more, you need to promote this more. If I knew about it sooner, I would have signed up way sooner. And I'm like, damn, like I am at marketing. So anyway, I thought I'd put a little segment in the middle of this tutorial and say there's a link in the description where you can find out more about how I would train you and how I would make you better at renders and what it's all about. There's a video there, and you can sign up to a form, and I'll send you across my workflow guide and a bunch of cool stuff that will start to put you on the right path in terms of how I would teach you and the workflow that I use day to day. Because the number one thing I notice in everybody that I train to make better renders is they already have most of the knowledge to make a good render. It's just all workflow, it's all alignment, and I try to put that in my videos the best I can, but there's only so much I can do. I can't stop you from having messy folders, I can't stop you from doing dumb things that set your renders back, but when I'm coaching you I can. So go check out that link below, and yeah, go back to your pillows. Sick. Catch you later. Bye bye. Because we're cached, but of course if you were to go back I would turn them back on. So let's do some renders with this. Let's grab a camera, and I'm going to set up as much of this as I can before we hit render on Redshift. Let's do about 135, and then let's go to the coordinates, zero out the X and the Y, the H, the P, and then we just zoom out, sit in the middle of the frame. And then this is actually a little bit of an odd object, because the center point here is not really got it centered in the composition, so you sort of have to wing it a little bit and kind of move it somewhere around here to get it really at the center, which is a little bit cheeky, but it's just the kind of object it is. It's this like oblique and offset triangle, so it's just what you have to do to kind of get it centered in the frame. We've got the camera set up, let's just get the render going. So we'll dock this on the side, we'll hit render, and we've got the pillows there and they're looking quite good. I'm gonna up the resolution here to 2560 by 1440, so we have a slightly nicer resolution. And then I'm going to drop in a HDRI. So for this, we're going to be using Grayscale Gorilla Plus. And I'm just going to go to Indoor Creative Spaces. I'm going to drop in Cafe number 2. So we drop that in there, and we've got some nice lighting. Now, I don't know if I actually even used a light on my render, on my Adidas one. I think I may have just... No, I did, because I used a GoBo light. Right. So anyway, what we're going to do is go to Details, and then take off the camera. So we don't see it in the background. I'm going to desaturate it a pretty decent amount, and then we're going to rotate this around till we see something cool. That'll do for now. And we're really only going to use this to just give us a little bit of shadow coverage. So then we can go to lights and drop in a dome light, and you can just call this BG, right? Because what we're going to do with this is we're going to zero out all of these parameters, but keep it on in the camera. So we have this white background, but we're using the HDRI light to control our shadows. Now, of course, it is acting as a light source right now as well, but the reason I'm saying it controls the shadows is because we're going to use another light source, which is going to be a Gobo light. Now, using Grayscale Gorilla Studio is if we go to the textures and then go to Gobo's abstract. I really like this one. I've been using this on like far too many renders recently. And you just send this to the scene. It comes in already set up. We go to F2, cameras, perspective. What I'm doing here is just setting up a second view. So if I middle mouse click here, and you have a look at these 4 views, this is our main one that Redshift is referencing, and we can make sure that it does that by hitting here and making sure that it references the Redshift camera. But this just allows me to twirl around. I can see my composition in Redshift. So with this Gobo light, we're going to grab this intensity and we're going to drag it out a whole bunch. And if we were to turn off the HDRI for a second, just to see what this is doing, twirl it around a little bit. I'm going to maybe reduce the cone angle. I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit, and we're just going to find a nice angle here where it's kind of got some cool shadows on it. Have a little play with it. Something like that is cool for now. We turn back on the HDRI, so you get a bit of lighting on both sides, and you've just kind of got this nice shadow. It just looks a little bit more interesting. The next thing is in that camera. I'll just come back to F1 here. Go to color correction. We're going to play about with these blacks, black threshold, and maybe add a bit of vignetting. Maybe increase exposure a bit. We're going to add that texture. So we're going to go back to Grayscale Gorilla Studio again. We're going to go to materials. Now, one of the materials I used, I believe it was the cotton fabric. I believe it was one of these. Cotton wool. it was, if it wasn't one of these, I'm going to find the exact same material that I used, and I'm quite bad for this, I can't actually remember what it was. It could have been in fabric materials. It was this one, so it was fabric wool knots, and there's a couple here that are quite similar, you can see, but I really like this one, and you can tell that the displacement is going to be really aggressive on that, which is what gave me that super tactile look, and all the ones in here in the fabrics are, yeah, they're very much like that, where if you crank up the displacement, they're really going to show. So we can just drop that in the scene, and we're just going to drop that on the Adidas logo. But just before I do that, I'm going to hit save, because once we start adding that displacement, it's going to make things a little bit slower. So we've dropped that on there, and you're going to see that it's not going to UV very well onto it. So we're going to fix that. So I'm going to close Redshift temporarily. Now what we're going to do is just go to UV edit, and this can be a little bit buggy sometimes. Now what we're going to do is just hit set UVW from projection. We're going to go to automatic UV. We're going to change it from packed to cubic, and that should solve most of our issues. That can be a bit whole buggy, that thing, but if we hit render now, we should see that we actually see a slightly normal looking texture. So, okay, we're good to go. We're good to work with. Turn my light back on. I just turned that off so it was a bit nicer to look at in the viewport. And we're going to come in here and we're going to double click and VAL. We're going to grab a value node. We're going to select all our nodes, and then we're going to go right click on the scale, connect node, existing nodes, float, and this will be our float node. So let's set the scale here to something like 10. So the higher we go, the smaller it's actually going to make the texture. And something of a scale like this is probably pretty similar to what I had. We just make sure that's good on all sides. It looks pretty good. Let's play through this a little bit. Somewhere where I had that big crease, so we're not looking at the normal logo. And you can see here the displacement is not working very well. So we need to fix that, and we're going to do that with subdivisions. So we're going to right click, render tags, artist object tag, and this is where things can get a little bit slow, so I would suggest saving your scene. And we're going to go to geometry, override. We're going to enable that, and you're going to see already that is going to help with some of that, but we need to enable displacement, and that brings it back. So we're going to bring the minimum edge length to 2. We're going to bring the maximum subdivisions to 8. Let's have a look at how that looks depending on the objects you're using, depending on what you're rendering with. You may have to put these values up or down as well, and you can see that number of things is a pretty nice amount. Now what you could also do is turn up that maximum displacement by 1, maybe. You can maybe turn up the displacement scale to 2 as well, and that might just make it a little bit more punchy and aggressive too. But you may have to compensate with more subdivisions. I think for this, from a distance, this looks pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with this. Although, looking at that frame now, it's not actually a very nice frame, so let's go somewhere else. Let's try like there. That's pretty cool. I'm going to go back to the F2 view. I'm going to make this light more aggressive, so I'm going to put the exposure up, so make that a bit more aggressive, and move around the front a bit more. Maybe we'll try the other side. Increase the cone angle a little bit, and I'm also going to increase that intensity again. Something a bit more like this. Something that's punchy. Move it about a whole bunch till we get something nice-ish. I'm going to recenter that camera. Now I can see it properly in Redshift. I can kind of see where the camera needs to be. Come a bit closer. And we're getting somewhere now. I'm going to drop in a LUT. So we're going to come to our settings here and we'll enable LUT. I'm going to drop that in there. Apply color management. Maybe, I think. Probably not. We'll set it to like 0.5. Enable color controls. We'll just dip that down a little bit there. Dip it up a little bit there. That's something nice and punchy. And I'm going to balance out in the camera a little bit again. So I'm going to drop the highlights. Increase the blacks a little bit. Maybe just drop the exposure too. So we've got more of a balanced image. And that displacement maybe is just like a little bit crazy. It's probably better just leaving that on 1. So we are pretty much there. We're in the final stretch now. We have a nice render. Still gonna mess with that camera a little bit. It would be nice to see parts of this, yeah, with more creases. It's gone a little bit flat across there. That's not looking great either. Okay, so a frame like that I find a little bit nicer. I think I prefer that. Another little lighting trick though is if we drop in a plane and we add a render tag to that RS object, and let's just go to override on the visibility, go to general and turn off primary ray visible. And if we just drop that below here, what we're doing is we're just getting some light bounces off of it. And that's just going to make it everything a little bit lighter, because it was feeling a bit shadowy, a little bit dark. And in the global light, I'm just going to crank the intensity back a little bit. You can also just move that target as well if you want to really kind of shift the shadows about. See where the light's hitting it. Where do we want it to hit? Where do we not want it to hit? Yeah, something like that's cool. Alright, I'm going to turn that plane off in the viewport, because it's ugly. Last thing to do would probably be to add a little bit of hair. So with this really nice pillow sim, just going to still balance this out a little bit. Still feeling a bit blown out. So we're going to add some hair. And a couple of things to do with that. It's actually not that difficult to do it the way we're going to do it. So we're going to add the hair, and you're going to see it's going to go crazy. So you just select your object. You go to Simulate, Hair Objects, Add Hair. We're going to add all that hair. We're just going to pause this for a second. Let's set the length to 3. Let's change the root to polygon area. We're going to go to Dynamics, and we're going to turn that off. Otherwise, when you play through this and you render an animation, they're all going to droop down. We're going to go to the hair material. Now, because of the kind of material we've gone, we actually don't really need to change the color of it. But we're going to set the thickness. We're going to set the root to 0.1. We're going to set the tip to 0.01. We're going to go to the length. We're going to set this to about 45%, maybe 35%. We're going to add frizz. We can make that about 25%. We're going to add kink. You can make that about 45% maybe. We'll add a bit of clumping. You make that about 2%. You should get away with that. That's pretty much all we need to do. At least on this material, that should give us some nice little frizz. Nice little bits of hair, you can see there. Looks quite cool. We can maybe make it a little bit longer. So, go back to the length here. Let's set that up to 50%. Of course, we set it to a length of 3 here, so I believe it's using 50% of 3. Which would be 1.5. You can see that's a little bit more visible, maybe to 40. So you can see all those little hairs coming out. And it looks realistic in terms of like the tactility it adds, but it also looks like a cat scratched it. So, you know, it looks cool for a render, but in terms of like ultra realism, I don't know. But it definitely adds that extra little bit of detail. That's pretty much the render done. Got a nice pillow render here. You can play through it. See it looking super cool, find different frames. Got it folding up in itself really, really nice. That looks super cool. I really like that frame I was on before, wherever that was. That's also quite a relatively nice frame. I don't really like that the kind of like behind the object is so dark. I think it's just because the gobo is at the front so much. So you could always add a backlight there as well to fix some of that, or just, you know, change your lighting up. I don't like that you really seem like this dark shadow there. I think when I did initially light this though, I had the gobo off to the left, which I think solves a decent portion of those issues. We can see a frame a little bit like that. But there is also the option just to add backlight. So if we were to drop it in area light and target it to the logo and just throw it back there, we could throw it maybe on this side. We'll go to details, turn it off in the camera. And we'll drop the power down to something like 20. Might have to come a bit closer. Maybe up the power a bit again. It's doing a little bit of work, but relaxes them a little bit. It just stops it from being so dark back there. Another way to get around that, just thinking in terms of lighting techniques, would be to twist the HDRI about. So you could maybe twist the HDRI to a place where it's going to illuminate that side of the pillow for you. So you can see that's also kind of relaxed them a little bit. A few ways to get around it. It might even be something that you like. For me, it's a little bit intense. I think an angle like that is probably a bit nicer. But I'm kind of wasting time now and going on a bit with pointless stuff. Render's in a good spot. That's what matters. Couple more notes before I let you go. Like I mentioned, I'm just going to turn off. I'm going to pause the render. I'm going to turn off my hair slightly so we can see what's going on here. I'm just going to turn off my light in the viewport as well. And I'll turn off the work plane. I'll turn off the world axis too. Couple of notes. So, like I said, my initial render, the overpressure, we were driving between 2 and 5 or something. So this is definitely a little bit more flaily than mine initially was, but the result is pretty similar. The other thing as well is I think maybe on this one, if we have a look at that vertex, I think I maybe made this a little bit too tight. This maybe could have been a bit thinner, and it could have been a bit more relaxed on the offset, just so it's we're not getting as much stillness on the sides, and that probably would get a little bit closer to my original result as well. You can see here kind of from the side it's feeling a bit blocky in the middle, but not too bad for the 30 minutes or whatever that I spent on it. And I think you kind of get the idea. You kind of know what values to mess with, looking at what overpressures we're dealing with here, and back on the surface, the target length maybe coming up with that could have been more useful as well, getting more expansion, because I think on my original it was around about 140, and messing with the turbulence a little bit as well, kind of seeing the kind of movement that you want. But for the most part, this sells, and it's pretty much the same look. But like I mentioned earlier, if you want to go and see similar renders over on my Patreon, where we're going to be dealing with objects that do not like to behave exactly quite as nicely as these did, then you can go and check those out over on my Patreon. For example, dealing with the Nike logo, the Windows logo, that one was a bit irritating. The Google logo was probably the one that played the nicest out of all of them. Also looking at using Vertex colors and how we can implement like really, really nice colors into everything as well. But back to the render here, I am pretty happy with the result that we got. And please do tag me in your results if you post any on Instagram. This is really cool stuff, and I thought it was worth a video because I hadn't seen anybody do exactly this, and this sort of pillow look where you can really feel the difference between the pressure and the area and the parts with a bit more air in them and stuff. I really like it. I think it's awesome, and I hope you enjoyed. Like I said earlier, first 5 people hit that link, you'll get my Patreon for a month for free. We're doing lots of Redshift tutorials over there at the minute, lots of stuff coming in the next couple of weeks, and you'll be able to access this other tutorial where we're just going to go way deeper. Probably won't do as much rendering aside from kind of going over the colors, but just really showing how we can tweak the simulation to get it to work in different objects. Because the moment you feel like you get it working, you go and drop in a different object and it just behaves entirely different, and it's quite annoying. But if you're not one of the first 5 people, do not worry at all. Discount code will be there. Discount code most likely going to be pillow, and I'll see you over there for the other video, and I'll see you here for another video very soon. Hope you liked this one, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and goodbye.